There we go. Hey, Dave.
Hello. Sorry about that.
It's okay. We can now get started. And so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our virtual conversation about virtual learning in a COVID-19 world. I am pleased to be joined by Dave MacKenzie, who is the president of the BC Schools Counsellors Association, as well as Brenna Clark Gray, who is the Educational Technologies Coordinator here at Thompson Rivers University. We are excited to be having this important conversation on virtual learning this fall. With decades of experience in virtual learning, TRU is equipped to provide a high-quality distance education with student safety as the top priority. I have a handful of questions for these two, and then we are going to answer any questions that come up from you. Please ask them in the chat box. Now, let's get started. My first question, all these questions will be for both of you, and what are you two expecting to see this fall with respect to learning environments? And I'll start with you, Dave.
Thanks, Todd. Can you just give me a wave with your hand that you can hear me? I just want to make sure my audio is working.
Yes.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. So in terms of what I'm expecting students to be excited, to be a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious. And that expectation hasn't changed with the pandemic. The move from high school to university is a big step. It's a bigger step for some than others, but it's a bigger step nevertheless. That learning at university is clearly different. The three of us have all been through that. We know that the difference exists. For kids, it's still an experience that they're not sure of. The pandemic just adds another layer of difference, and one that we don't necessarily know what that's going to be like. Students have had a little bit of a window into what online learning and distance learning is about, but I expect the students to be just as excited about the new learning opportunities that exist at TRU and every other institution moving forward in the fall.
And how about you, Brenna?
Yeah, I think that's all very true. This is a transition for our students, no matter what. In any year, September is a time of transition for students. But I think that it's worth students realizing that most of their content is going to be delivered remotely, with the exception of some specialty programs. And so that comes with some different challenges for students, learning how to work on your own, how to motivate yourself to learn when you're not inside a classroom physically can be a challenge. We've got lots of supports in place to help students learn how to learn in this environment. But Dave's right. You have to learn how to learn when you arrive in university regardless, and this is just a different context for that. So yeah, I think that students should expect that they're going to walk into rich, robust learning environments. Dave alluded to having some experience with online learning in the spring and summer, but a lot of the transition we went through in March was really based in panic, right? And we've now had some time this summer to prepare faculty and to prepare support resources and to get students into a place where they will find success. So if the summer and spring were a little bit stressful for you, know that we know that, and we're looking at making the transition as smooth and easy as possible going into the fall.
And Brenna, I'll start with you on this question, and I'm just wondering, do you think that the quality of education and experience that students will receive will be dramatically different than in-person learning?
I think the experience is different, for sure. I wouldn't pretend otherwise. I don't think the quality is necessarily different. And I know that some students had a really difficult time with the transition in the spring. But we were all floundering, right? It was new for everyone. I'm really heartened to see the commitment of TRU faculty in learning the tools, in establishing their courses for fall. We run workshops, so my job is to help support faculty through this transition. We run at least 3 workshops a week where we have 50 to 100 faculty members with us learning the tools, but also learning about what makes a great course in a remote learning environment. How do you connect with students? How do you build that community? How do you demonstrate care? And I think, it's worth students knowing that their faculty are learning right now too, that nobody is going into this in the fall an expert. We have 25 years of great research into how to learn online though, and our faculty are drawing on that knowledge right now. So yes, you can have a quality learning experience in an online environment. People have been doing it for 20 plus years. What you can't have is the exact same learning environment. And so faculty are making that adjustment now so that they can help support students going into the fall semester.
And Dave, I'm curious, what are you hearing from students and parents? You're hearing from your members and your folks working with grade 12 students, but what are you hearing from students and parents right now?
It piggybacks on what my first comments were. A little bit of anxiousness about what that will look like. The issue of quality does come up in the conversations. Am I going to receive the same level of education? And I remind people that the people on the other end of the computer screen are still those passionate, well-educated, incredibly enthusiastic professors and instructors whose passion hasn't changed because they're not face-to-face. They have some learning to do themselves in terms of using these new platforms and technologies to communicate that passion. But first and foremost, the quality of the work that the students will be doing and that they'll be receiving from their professors isn't going to change. How it's going to be delivered is going to be changed. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it was already going to change anyway. They're moving from their high school classroom of 20 students where the teacher may have taught them 4 times to somebody that they never have received instruction from before. And that experience is going to take some getting used to, whether it's face-to-face or in the virtual environment. If going to university is a good idea, last year, it's still a great idea this year, moving on with your education. And the reality is we don't know how long this is going to last. But what I do know is Thompson Rivers isn't going anywhere. Universities in the country and in the world aren't going anywhere. No one's closing down. Everybody's just looking for new ways to engage students and to communicate and infect students with the passion and the enthusiasm that professors already have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, TRU is so uniquely placed for this challenge too. My job as coordinator of educational technologies is housed within the open learning division, although my job is to entirely 100% I support campus faculty with their tech needs. And that's fantastic because it means that from my role, I can draw on the expertise and strengths of instructional designers and production team members and curriculum specialists who have years and years and years of experience in providing high quality educational experiences online. So our faculty are in really good supported hands, which is going to enable them to feel confident in supporting students through the transition.
Now I'm wondering to both of you, but I'll start with you, Brenna, but do you think in fact that this new style of delivery that we temporarily have, do you think that in fact could potentially enhance the student's experience?
I think it depends on the student and what they need. I know that there are students out there who will really appreciate a more asynchronous or sort of anytime learning approach to their studies, especially for students who work in areas like grocery stores and other essential services where their hours are very different than they might have been planning for in a fall semester before. An asynchronous course load allows you to plan around caregiving responsibilities with siblings or parents. It allows you to plan around your work schedule. So there are challenges in moving to a remote delivery model. It certainly requires students to find within themselves a lot of motivation that might have been provided by the classroom experience, that physical classroom experience previously. But for a lot of students, they may find that this mode of learning enables them to fit education into their life in a way that might have seemed impossible before. So students should really think about what it would mean to do more of their learning on their own schedule. Really different from the experience they're coming out of high school having.
How about yourself, Dave? Do you have any perspective on that?
No, I appreciate what Brenna said. I think it's that perspective that this learning is different. Again, the transition from high school where things are pretty structured for kids. If kids show up in the building, we say this all the time, if kids show up in the building, the teachers are here to get you through. The responsibility is really a shared responsibility where the adults do our best to try to shed that responsibility and push it back onto the kids. Going to university, again, pre-pandemic was always about that. The online environment just accentuates the need for students to find a way to carve out time in their day to make sure that the learning continues. And that's going to be true after the pandemic, and face-to-face learning continues in a more robust way. And I think in that respect, when this is over, I think that the style and the commitment to learning may be in fact greater in those third and fourth year classes, because kids have found a way to reach that level of self-directedness that's really going to be important for kids to be successful. So it's one of those, if you can manage this and make this work, the rest of your high school, your university experience, actually might not be as challenging as it might have been before.
Now, there's a lot of students right now that are in the midst of deciding whether or not they should pursue this post-secondary education in the fall. And I know both of you have sort of briefly touched on this, but I'm wondering from both of you, we'll start with you, Dave, what advice do you have for those students and parents who are going through that decision-making process?
In September, when parents and kids were asked by school staffs, by school counselors to consider what your plans were for the fall, we had no idea that the pandemic was coming. And many kids made that commitment. Yes, I'm heading off to university. That commitment actually started last year when they picked their courses in grade 12 for trying to meet requirements for the programs that they were applying for. If it was a good idea back a year ago, and it was a good idea in September, it's still a good idea now. Don't let the pandemic get in the way of continuing to move forward in achieving the goals and dreams that you set for yourself, in some cases that you set for yourself when you were in grade 6. There isn't any reason schools like TRU, as Brenna has talked about, have pivoted really well in terms of being able to offer an experience that is equal to what that face-to-face experience would be. The challenge is, know that there's a greater responsibility on students to make this work. But again, that was always true about the post-secondary environment. There's no one taking attendance, whether it's face-to-face or in the virtual world. You have to be willing to show up. Now the distraction is maybe a YouTube channel or looking out the living room window. In the past, it might have been the pub or the restaurant on campus. It's a potentially different distraction. But again, if the commitment was made, stick with that commitment. There are going to be other challenges that are going to get in the way, possibly, of continuing your education. The pandemic is just one of those things. So, you keep focused on what it is that your goals are.
What are your thoughts, Brenna?
Yeah, I think situations are changing for families all the time, and this is a really difficult moment. And I leave it to the counselors and the parents to help students decide what the best solution is for them. I think that for a lot of people, it's something they're thinking a lot about right now, and there are resources out there from school counselors, for example, to help you make those decisions. What I can tell you is if you do choose to come to TRU, we've got you. We're supporting you, we're supporting your instructors, and we're going to move you through. You will have a positive experience. We're putting everything in place so that your learning will happen, and that your learning will be of high quality, and that you'll learn what you need to know that brought you to university in the first place. And, I feel like from my perspective, I'm a parent, but my little guy is 3. I'm not having these difficult conversations right now. So from my perspective, all I can offer is letting you know that the faculty at TRU care so much. And I spend every single day from very early in the morning until very late at night in deep, thoughtful conversations with faculty members about how to best deliver material, about how to demonstrate to students that care that they're used to demonstrating in the classroom, about how to build the kind of community that makes university worthwhile, even in a remote space. We're working such long hours on that. So whatever the right choice is for you, make the right choice for you, but know that if you come here, we will support you through the transition and through your education.
I'm curious from both of you about this because, clearly, we'll get back to, hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll get back to a, largely in-person learning and learning experience. But I'm wondering whether either of you think that these months and this experience will change the delivery in the future.
I hope so. I hope that faculty find tools right now that they're learning because they have to, that they actually really like, and that they find are value adds for education for their students, and that we proceed to a much more blended model of education where faculty feel really comfortable engaging with digital tools, especially around digital tools that help students in the workplace later on. So I'm thinking about things like WordPress. We can set faculty and students up with WordPress accounts and get them running on a platform that powers like a third of the internet, right? So not only is that a great pedagogical tool for learning out in the open, but it's a great job skills, life skills tool too. So I hope so. I hope that this kind of leap into the deep end of educational technologies helps faculty to see what opportunities are out there that they can make use of in the future when they're able to make the choices with a little bit more control than they feel right now.
What are your thoughts, Dave?
I think one of the bonuses I think of technology is, it provides some space and time that a face-to-face class doesn't, in terms of being able to contribute and to think about how what you're learning presently connects with what you already know, and connects with what you think you might want to know. In a classroom, when there's small group discussions, sometimes a person's anxiousness about that environment gets in the way of their contributions, because they feel sometimes under the gun to be able to contribute and think on the moment. Those skills develop as the learner develops. In an online environment, in an asynchronous world, where I'm sure most courses will be initially, there's more time for students to reflect on how their learning connects with what they already know, and making sense of what they're learning, so that when they're asked to communicate their thoughts and ideas, they actually may have a little more time to contribute. And I think it may make help with a deeper commitment to what they're learning.
And there will be some programs in the fall, both at TRU and other universities, whether that's trades or science labs, that will be in person with very strict safety guidelines. And I'm wondering, probably this is mostly for you, Brenna, but if you can answer it, but how are universities responding to this need to very select face-to-face delivery?
Well, I think that's part of the advantage of moving most of campus to remote learning, is that we have space for the programs that really need it. I think trades, nursing practicums, upper level science labs, these are things that probably need to happen in person. Now, the hows and whys of those decisions are made pretty high above me. I don't really know what all goes into it. I do know that the number one focus is on providing a safe learning environment. So where content can be delivered safely in person, or needs to be delivered safely in person, the folks who are in charge of those decisions are working really hard to establish the spaces and the protocols to make that happen. But students in those programs may also find that, for example, theory components of their courses are moved to a remote environment to keep students at home, so that there's more space for the students who need to be moved through practicums or trades or labs. So I think students should wait to hear more detailed guidance from their programs, but be be confident, especially parents who are tuning in. Do be confident that these choices are being made with health and safety first and foremost. You know, we hear about a lot of institutions south of the border that are really pushing towards a face-to-face delivery model for fall. You're not seeing that here because we know that the safest option for fall is to keep as many students off campus as possible, to allow those students who need to be on campus to learn the skills they need to learn, the safe space in which to do it.
Dave, have you heard, I'm sure you've talked to parents that are potentially concerned about sort of that safety question for these programs we're talking about that might have to be in person. What are you hearing from parents about the safety question?
For the few that I have spoken with, there's a lot of trust that the universities, just as other larger institutions, have taken heed of the recommendations and the guidelines from the provincial health officer. And I think there's a recognition, you know, you see it in grocery stores, you see it in all kinds of retail outlets. People are taking those guidelines seriously. The organizations are, you know, I think if there's a concern, it's will the people on campus, will the students on campus also take those guidelines seriously? And I think, as Brenna said, there's such a reduction of the number of in-person opportunities that it will be really easy for students to be able to feel safe because the way things will be structured. But again, the fact that all of those things are taken care of should actually, and what I've said to parents is that should actually give you a measure of confidence that the safety concerns or the safety or health concerns you may have will be less of a distraction when you get there. And that's, I think that's an important piece, because there's always distractions on a university campus that aren't related to the classroom, whether it's the gym or the bar or the coffee shop, or just the group of friends that get together. And let's skip class today. You know, there's always those distractions. I don't think those safety concerns really should be considered one of those distractions.
Well, and I think there's a degree of confidence that parents and students should have, that the provincial health officer, you know, she's been very deliberate to date, just generally around the public's well-being and safety, and it's no different about colleges and universities, right? And she's been that very calm but firm voice publicly, and I'm sure privately, in, you know, whether it's universities or restaurants or other kinds of settings, that she and her office are being very diligent about making sure that all of us are being kept safe through this pandemic. I'm wondering from the two of you, I know we sort of had a number of questions that I've asked, but do you two have, I know I didn't mention this before we did this, but do either of you have questions for each other? Because, you know, you're both reaching, you do different roles and speak to different audiences, but do you two have questions for each other?
I'm interested from Dave about what kinds of anxiety students are expressing around moving online, if there are things that we can help to ameliorate from our end and the support resources that we build. We'd love to hear about that.
One of them was around the various kinds of assessments at university. You know, I think there's a recognition, or we try to communicate, I think as secondary counselors try to communicate that assessment of your learning in university is different than in a high school. There are typically less things that are considered in that assessment of your learning, so therefore they're more important. You know, the traditional 10-page paper, but there's also things like presentations and group work and those sorts of things that can still happen in a virtual environment. In one particular situation, I had a couple of parents ask about exams and how that will happen to ensure that there isn't cheating, because in a virtual world, if everybody's going to receive the same education and receive the same assessment, the same exam, is my A that I earn going to be the same as the A if somebody maybe finds a way to subvert the system and not be truthful in responding? So I'm curious, what is TRU doing, or what are universities in general doing to address that issue around students not being honest?
Yeah, there's a range of responses to that, and it's definitely a number one post pivot to digital kind of question is how do we maintain academic integrity? A lot of institutions are moving to a very strict surveillance model, using surveillance tools like cameras in students' workspaces to record them, and to sort of assessments get to stay basically the same. You just sort of move the proctoring into another mode. We've not pursued that as the number one strategy at TRU. We're primarily spending a lot of time in helping instructors design assessments for academic integrity first and foremost. We know that all of the things that establish academic integrity in the classroom from all the research on teaching and learning are also things that establish good learning. They're really related. So not having sort of a giant high stakes assessment out of nowhere, but instead scaffolding small assessments up into a more high stakes assessment so that students feel comfortable with the material and certain understanding of it. Limiting those kinds of big scale multiple choice exams that are very easy to cut and paste into our friend Google, and instead focusing on concept application and higher order thinking on topics, and asking students to do a lot more reflection on their own learning. I think that might be a difference for first year students this year, is seeing that they are being asked about the process of their own learning, since we are all learning in this new space together. So in all of those ways, we're trying to help students take greater responsibility for their own learning. And we have much less of a model where we sort of outsource the surveillance to a private company, with all of the issues around data and privacy that entails, and instead more about good, solid instructional design that improves learning and reduces violations of academic integrity.
There have been, both of you have touched on this, but I think it's an important question to get across, and that is, are there, there's obviously some students who are considering delaying their entry into studies, but what are the pitfalls of this choice, I guess, of potentially delaying their studies, and maybe from both of you, what are the pitfalls of this choice? Because students and parents, some of them are considering delaying studies because of the pandemic and the new delivery models that are taking place. So I'm just wondering from both of you, what are the pitfalls of that choice?
I'll begin. Yeah. I think the pitfall, like again, pre-pandemic, the pitfall, if you're committed to going to university, if you're that student that sees that as a part of your future, getting started on that journey right after high school, I think is always a good, in my opinion, is always a good choice. There are lots of things that can get in the way of pursuing that. Life gets busy, life gets complicated, life gets full of other things, and trying to carve out space and time for university education or college education takes lots of planning and lots of commitment. The other piece is we actually don't know how long this is going to last for. Mm-hmm. This where I think we're all very hopeful that maybe within a half a year we'll be back to a regular face-to-face environment, but it may not be. We may be an entire year and a bit into this environment, and delaying because of the pandemic actually hands over too much power to the pandemic to judge what it is that your life is going to look like. Mm-hmm. It does need to be considered in the decisions you make about how you carry out your life, but it shouldn't be the sole guiding factor. And that same thing applies for your pursuit of higher education. Learning after high school shouldn't be dependent upon anything other than your own commitment to that learning after high school.
Yeah, I agree with Dave. I think it's good to remember that it's not a race. The university will always be here, and you're not on a clock. So if you decide that maybe you're going to take one fewer course or something while you evaluate whether this is exactly the mode in which you want to learn, we'll still be here. We'll still be here. And this is a decision that students need to make with the people who know them best, their teachers, their counselors, and their parents. Again, though, I come back to telling you that if TRU is the right choice for you and you choose to join us in the fall, you will find that the experience is high quality, your instructors are supported and you are supported, and that there's a community here that cares very deeply about your education and cares very deeply about helping you get through this. And I think that I really like what Dave said about not letting the pandemic make all your decisions for you. It's a really difficult and scary time, and I don't want to minimize that or minimize the strain that a lot of families are feeling right now. But if you have the means to, then I think thinking past that to how starting in the fall helps you achieve the goals that you have for yourself is also really, really important.
Now, for both of you, are there things you'd like to say that I haven't asked about?
I don't think so. I feel like I've said everything I intended to. I do want to reiterate that from my role as the person supporting faculty making these really complex and difficult moves, I've been surprised, heartened, delighted by the commitment of TRU faculty to this very strange new adventure. I know I'm brand new to TRU. I started in August, which is a really good time to decide to start as an educational technology coordinator. It's right before a pandemic. I didn't know what to expect from the community, but what I have experienced is a community of educators who are completely committed to their subject material and to finding a way to make their subject material work in this new space. And I think that's what students need to know first and foremost. Everything else is sort of personal to you and your situation and what is best for you, but everything is in place here for you to have a really positive experience.
It's not really a question, but a comment that I'll just make is trying to reframe this pandemic experience. I think in some situations, the pandemic has actually made post-secondary education more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of two students at my own school in particular that are going off to post-secondary education, but they weren't going to because the program they wanted to attend meant that they had to travel and live in Kamloops. Mm-hmm. And they didn't have the finances to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. They probably will in a year or so, but they can take those courses and they can be engaged in that program and still live at home. Mm-hmm. The only learning opportunity we have for that is close to home, and that's limited. Mm-hmm. As a more comprehensive institution, TRU offers a range of programs that aren't available locally. Mm-hmm. And just about everything is available now without actually having to spend money on rent and transportation to Kamloops. So that's been a bonus. And when I had a couple conversations with parents, that reframe of actually this makes it more accessible. They're mm-hmm. like, yeah, actually it's not going to cost us much this year. Mm-hmm. And we'll be able to spend more time looking for the right accommodations and affordable accommodations when it comes to heading to TRU when that time comes.
One thing I did want to mention, and both of you have touched on this, but the professors and instructors and faculty members at TRU and all universities, I know I've heard stories of many of them working really hard to deliver that quality education to students, and it's not just at TRU but around the province and around Canada. Mm-hmm. So certainly we should do a big shout out to those folks, because they're sort of being hit. They were hit with this like all of us were, but certainly this was not something that they were expecting. We don't have any questions through the chat at the moment. So before I end things, I did want to just make sure that in case either of you had any final thoughts or any final words before we sign off, that I give you the chance to do that.
Actually, I do have one question, and it may may not be one that can be answered, Brenna or Todd, but with this move to the virtual world, most of the students that I've spoken with and my colleagues, I think, have been connecting with, kids have a piece of technology that would get them on the internet to be able to interact. Is there the one worry from, and I'm thinking about one particular conversation in mind was, do I need this big fancy computer? Do I need something special in terms of a piece of technology to make this work? Will I be in a disadvantage if I just use my iPad or my 3-year-old Dell computer?
Yeah. It's a really good question, Dave, and I'm glad you asked it. We do have a document posted to the TRU website with our sort of recommended base level technology for students. A few things that they will find helpful is a laptop from within the last 5 years around there in terms of operating systems, particularly with PCs. What we would expect is that your computer was, from within the last 5 years. A web camera, a headset mic like this is really helpful so you don't pick up all the audio. I'm hoping you guys can't hear my kiddo playing downstairs, for example. Those kinds of things are helpful, nice to have extras, but bottom line is a laptop from the last 5 years that can run Google Chrome or Firefox. Chrome and Firefox are the supported browsers for most of all of the learning technologies. Actually, it just ran them through my head, all the learning technologies at TRU. So as long as students can comfortably run one of those browsers and the computer is newer than 5 years, they should be okay. And as I say, a webcam and a headset, really helpful for chatting to your classmates and engaging with your instructor. It doesn't need to be the hottest, fastest laptop to access our technologies. And in fact, we spend a great deal of time helping faculty to streamline their course materials and offer course materials that require less bandwidth to download, smaller file sizes, not tools that involve all the bells and whistles. Now, there are going to be specialty programs that require additional tools for sure, but your general first year arts and science type of student is going to be just fine probably with the device they have access to. An iPad is a good one to bring up. You can do a lot of your course materials on a tablet, but it does run into limitations, particularly around final assessments like quizzes and exams. And so for that reason, we do recommend having a sort of proper computer if that's a possibility for you. You'll have a smoother experience with an older computer than you will with a newer tablet.
So a Fortnite setup would do you fine.
Yeah, if you can play Fortnite, you're going to be just fine with the tools we have at TRU. That's awesome. A great analogy.
Okay, great. Okay.
Again, we don't have any questions on the chat, but I'm just mindful as well of the time. And so I think we're going to maybe end it there. I just wanted to emphasize that if anyone watching has any further questions, particularly for TRU, go to tru.ca. In terms of any other question that they might have, I'm sure Dave would agree that if grade 12 students have questions, do go to your high school counselors. They'll be more than happy to answer questions and work with you. And as well, if you have any questions after we're done this live chat, please do feel free to add those on the chat. We'll do our best to answer those and reach out to us if you have questions. And I do really want to acknowledge both you, Dave and Brenna, for your time. And I think these kinds of conversations will be important. And even listening to both of you, if I was a grade 12 student or a parent, I think I feel slightly more confident going into the fall, and that's an important piece. So we can sign off unless either you two have anything else to add. You're good?
I'm good.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks for the opportunity, Todd.
Yeah, this is great.
Our pleasure. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.